I was late. Not fashionably, not excusably, fatally late. The kind of late that unravels futures. The meeting was supposed to define the rest of my life. My first encounter with my fiancé's father, the reclusive billionaire Arthur Sterling. But instead of gliding into his mansion calm and composed, I was breathless, half running through his immaculate gates, mud clinging to my heels and guilt chitening around my ribs. Before I tell you how I ended up there, staring into the icy blue eyes of the man who held my future in his hands, let me take you back to the beginning of that day, the day I learned that kindness has its own kind of wealth. The invitation arrived in David's inbox 3 days earlier, only it wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Typed on law firm stationery, sharp and cold as a subpoena, Mr. Arthur Sterling requests the presence of his son, Mr. David Sterling, and his companion, Ms. Ava Peters, for a formal dinner at his private residence. No greeting, no looking forward, just requests the presence. David had stared at the screen as if it contained a ticking bomb. His father hadn't spoken to him in almost 5 years. Now suddenly, a dinner. And if there's one thing I learned in those 10 days that followed, it's this. When Arthur Sterling invites you, it's not for dinner. It's for judgment. The week leading up to that night was pure torture. David, usually confident and controlled, was a wreck of pacing nerves and late-night monologues. "Ava, you don't get it," he kept saying, raking his hands through his hair. "My father doesn't do normal. Everything with him is a test. The house, the food, the way he looks at you, all of it. One wrong move, one word out of place, and it's over. Our engagement, the inheritance, everything." I'd never seen him like that before, so small inside his own fear. He gave me a list of rules so long it felt like a survival manual. Don't mention my job at the nonprofit. Don't talk about my parents being teachers. Don't use slang. Don't be late. And for God's sake, wear the navy blue dress and the cashmere scarf. He said his father valued appearance over anything, which, in hindsight, was ironic. That morning, I ironed the navy dress until the seams could cut glass. I wrapped the scarf, a soft gray cashmere, warm and expensive, around my neck like armor. I tried to memorize small talk about art and economics, even though all I really wanted to talk about was the new community garden we were building back at my nonprofit. By noon, my reflection looked perfect, but it didn't look like me. The train ride out to Sterling Estate was quiet, each mile pulling me further from the city and deeper into his world, a world of old money and long shadows. David had gone ahead early to prepare. That word alone made me uneasy. From the station, it was just a short taxi ride to the mansion, but I needed to breathe, to walk. I thought the fresh air might steady me. The town was absurdly perfect. Manicured lawns, grand iron gates, streets lined with trees that probably cost more than my car. I felt like a trespasser in some gilded fairy tale. I checked my watch. 4:40. Still time. Barely. Then, just past a stretch of hedges, I saw him. He sat on a park bench that didn't belong in this world of marble and glass. His clothes were frayed, his shoes cracked. He looked like life had forgotten him a long time ago. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled his coat tighter, but it wasn't enough. He was shivering. For one moment, I hesitated. I could hear David's voice echoing in my head. "Don't be late. My father hates lateness. It's a sign of chaos." My fingers tightened around my purse. I could walk on. Pretend I didn't see him. Pretend I was one of them. But then I saw his eyes. Pale, startlingly clear blue eyes looking straight at me. And I remembered something my grandmother once said.
The real test of character, my dear, is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you. Before I even realized what I was doing, I turned toward him. "Sir, are you all right?" He looked up, his voice a quiet rasp. "Just a bit cold, miss. Missed the shelter's lunch today, that's all." I opened my bag and pulled out the sandwich I'd made for myself. Turkey, Swiss, nothing fancy. "It's not much," I said, handing it to him, "but it's yours." He hesitated, studying me with that same quiet, unreadable look. Then, slowly, he took it. "Thank you," he murmured. "That's very kind." Then I saw him shiver again, sharply, like a tree in the wind. Without thinking, I unwrapped the scarf from my neck and draped it around his shoulders. "You need this more than I do," I said softly. He touched the fabric as if it were something sacred. "You are a very kind woman," he said quietly. There was something about his tone. Not flattery, not surprise, recognition. I smiled, nodded, and walked away before I could change my mind. When I glanced at my watch again, my heart nearly stopped. 5:12 p.m. I was late. Not a few minutes late, the kind that makes billionaires end engagements. I ran. By the time I reached the Sterling estate, my hair clung to my face, my pulse hammering. The gates loomed like something out of a Gothic painting. Black iron twisted into elegant curves, the letter S shining gold at their center. I pressed the intercom. "Ava Peters, here to see Mr. Sterling." A pause, then a metallic buzz, and the gates swung open. The driveway was so long it felt like a test in itself, winding through ancient oaks toward a stone mansion that looked carved from time. And there, at the top of the steps, was David, pacing like a trapped animal. When he saw me, his relief turned instantly to fury. "Ava, where have you been? You're 17 minutes late. He's waiting. Do you understand what this means?" "I'm sorry," I gasped. "There was an old man. He was freezing. An old man? A homeless man? Ava, are you insane? You made us late because of some vagrant?" I opened my mouth to explain, but he wasn't listening. "And where's your scarf? The cashmere one, the one I told you to wear." I hesitated. "I gave it to him." "You gave it away?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "You gave away a $700 scarf to a bum?" His words cut deeper than I expected. But beneath his rage, I saw something else. Fear. This wasn't anger born of pride. It was the terror of a boy who'd never once been good enough for his father. For a fleeting moment, I pitied him. Then I straightened, smoothed my dress, and said quietly, "If kindness makes me unfit for your family, then I'm glad to fail the test." Just then, the massive doors opened. A tall butler, face carved from marble, bowed slightly. "Mr. Sterling will see you now." David's grip on my hand tightened, clammy and desperate. "Smile," he whispered, "and please, Ava, don't say anything stupid." As we stepped into that vast, echoing foyer, my heart pounded. The air smelled faintly of old books and colder secrets. Somewhere in the depths of that house, the test I thought I'd failed was about to begin.
My feet rooted to the floor. David tugged at my arm. "Ava, what are you doing? Come on." He followed my gaze, confusion tightening his face, and then it hit him too. His father, the man he'd worshipped, feared, and tried to impress his entire life, sitting there in a tattered jacket with my scarf draped over his shoulders like a king's sash. David's face drained of color. His voice broke. "Father? What are you wearing? Are you unwell?" But Arthur Sterling wasn't looking at his son. His eyes were fixed on me. And when he smiled, it wasn't the smug smirk of a billionaire. It was the warm, knowing smile of the man I'd fed in the park. "Welcome, Ava," he said. His voice was calm, soft, exactly as I remembered. "Please, come in. Have a seat." David stood there, speechless. "Father, what is this? You were pretending to be—" "A homeless man?" Arthur interrupted smoothly. "Yes, I was." The words hung in the air like a live wire. He turned back to me. I owe you an apology, my dear. It's an old habit of mine, wandering beyond my walls, observing. You see, I've spent years trying to understand people, to find a trace of kindness in a world that values none. He gestured toward the empty chairs around the table. I've invited many into this room, wealthy men, powerful heirs, ambitious women, all of them dressed perfectly, all of them desperate to perform. But today I met someone who didn't perform. His eyes softened. You stopped. You saw me. Not a nuisance, not a test, just a person. And that, he said quietly, told me everything I needed to know. David's face twisted, part disbelief, part humiliation. He looked at me as though he were seeing me for the first time, or realizing how little he ever had. You were late, he blurted, voice cracking. You failed. She was late, father. Arthur's voice cut through the air like a blade. She failed your test, David, not mine. Silence. You wanted her to wear wealth, to perform intelligence, to mimic what you think I respect. But what I respect, he said, leaning forward, is integrity, and Ava, my boy, has it in spades. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't know whether to cry, apologize, or thank him. He motioned to the chair beside him. Please, Ava, sit here. I hesitated, glancing at David. His eyes were pleading, a silent, desperate don't. But something in me had shifted. The fear that had ruled me all week evaporated, replaced by a strange calm. I walked the length of that table and took the seat beside Arthur Sterling. The scarf around his shoulders brushed against my arm. It was still warm. He smiled faintly. Now then, shall we have dinner? I imagine there's much to discuss, weddings to plan, futures to shape. He turned to his son. You may sit as well, David, or you may leave. The choice, for once, is yours. The butler reappeared, ghost-like, setting down silver dishes and pouring wine. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. David sank into a chair at the far end of the table, as though he couldn't bear to be near either of us. Arthur began to speak, softly, conversationally, as though nothing about this scene was unusual. He asked me about my work, the nonprofit David had warned me never to mention. He asked about my parents, about the small house I'd grown up in. And when I spoke, trembling at first, then steadier, he listened, really listened. No judgment, no tests. Your parents sound like good people, he said, eyes bright with quiet respect. They raised a remarkable daughter. When dessert came, he untied the scarf from around his neck and folded it neatly. This, he said, handing it back to me, belongs to you. Thank you. It was a very great comfort. I took it with trembling hands, and in that moment I realized the truth. Arthur Sterling hadn't been testing me. He'd been testing his son. He wanted to see whether David had learned compassion or whether fear of losing wealth had blinded him to it completely. By the time the meal ended, David hadn't spoken another word. Arthur stood, his presence filling the room like quiet thunder. You have a remarkable woman here, David. Do not make the mistake of underestimating her again. Your place in my life and my company remains, not because of your performance tonight, but because of hers. He turned to me, his expression softening. Welcome to the family, Ava. And with that, he left the room. I sat there for a long moment, my heart still racing, my mind spinning. I had thought I was walking into a test of manners, of appearances, but it had been something much bigger, a test of soul. And somehow, without meaning to, I had passed it.
The car ride back from the Sterling estate was the longest, quietest drive of my life. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill the air, it presses on your skin, heavy, suffocating. David gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. His knuckles were white, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on the dark, winding road ahead. The world outside the windows blurred, Manicured hedges, stone gates, the ghostly glow of wealth receding behind us. But inside the car, it was just two people. One humbled, one haunted. I wanted to say something, anything, but every word I thought of sounded like a wound. So I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, my scarf clutched tight. The same scarf that had somehow burned its way into both of our lives. When we reached the city, the hum of traffic returned, the comforting chaos of real life. But the distance between us didn't shrink. As soon as we walked into our small apartment, our safe, messy, normal home, David dropped his keys on the counter and sat heavily on the couch. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at nothing. Then, finally, his voice cracked the silence. Small, hollow, unsteady. He humiliated me. I turned slowly toward him. David. In front of you, in front of everyone, his voice rose, raw, almost childlike. Do you have any idea what that was for me? I've spent my entire life trying to prove myself to that man, Ava. And tonight he treated me like a child, like a failure. His hands were shaking. He wasn't trying to humiliate you. He was trying to teach you something. David laughed bitterly. Oh, and what's that? That I'm heartless, that I'm not good enough, that you're some saint, and I'm... He broke off, pressing his palms into his eyes. God, I can't believe this. I sat down across from him, calm, quiet. He saw something in you, I said carefully, but you were too busy trying to become what you thought he wanted, and you missed what he actually valued. Which is what? Charity? Pity? Kindness, I said simply. Decency. Empathy. The things that don't make money, but make meaning. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. You think I don't have those things? I hesitated. I think you've spent so long trying to impress him that you forgot who you really are. That did it. The words hit him like a slap. He stood abruptly, pacing the room, hands on his head. You don't understand. You don't know what it's like growing up with a man like that. Everything was a test. Every grade, every handshake, every dinner conversation. He doesn't love, he evaluates. He stopped, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were red. You passed tonight because you didn't know you were being tested. If you had, you might have failed too.
That hurt. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Maybe he was right. Maybe if I'd known, I would have hesitated. Maybe I would have overthought it. But then again, maybe not. I took a slow breath and walked toward him. David, I said gently, your father isn't looking for perfection. He's looking for proof that his son understands what's real. And you think you understand him better than I do? He asked, voice cracking. I don't know, I said softly, but I think he saw something in both of us tonight, and maybe it's not too late for you to see it too. For a moment, his expression softened. His mouth trembled like he wanted to say something, to apologize, but pride won the war. He looked away. I just need some time. I nodded. Take it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city hummed faintly outside our window, but my mind was still in that cold, glittering dining room. The chandelier, the long table, Arthur Sterling's steady eyes. His words echoed over and over. Character, integrity, simple human kindness, the only true currency in this bankrupt world. It was strange. I'd gone there terrified of failing a rich man's test and left realizing the real test was something I'd already passed long ago. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't even about family approval.
It was about how much of your soul you're willing to spend to fit into someone else's world. And that night, I'd made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to spend mine anymore. The next morning, I woke to find David still sitting on the couch, unshaven, eyes heavy with regret. He didn't look like the man I'd fallen in love with, confident, polished, ambitious. He looked like the boy his father had raised, brilliant, broken, scared to death of not being enough. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, in a voice that sounded almost like a whisper, he said, "I'm sorry." I turned to him, not sure if I'd heard him right. "For what?" He swallowed hard. "For everything. For yelling at you. For making you feel like you had to pass some impossible test. For being him." I walked over, sat beside him. "You're not him, David. You just need to stop living for his approval." He nodded slowly, tears brimming. "I think I don't even know who I am without it." I reached for his hand. "Then let's figure it out, together." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The morning light fell through the window, soft and forgiving. And for the first time, I saw the man I loved, not as the son of Arthur Sterling, but just David. That day was the beginning of something new. Fragile, uncertain, but honest. We didn't talk about money or family or tests. We talked about us, about what we wanted to build, who we wanted to be. For the first time, we were free from the shadow of his father's mansion. At least, that's what I thought. Because 3 weeks later, Arthur Sterling called again, and this time, his invitation wasn't for dinner. It was for business. The garden stretched out behind the mansion like a dream, a carefully constructed wilderness of roses, fountains, and winding stone paths. And there, kneeling by a row of pale lilies, was Arthur Sterling. No jacket, no scarf, just a man, sleeves rolled up, dirt under his nails. He looked up when he heard me. "Ava," he said, smiling. "Good. You came." "Of course," I said softly. "I wasn't sure why." He stood, brushing soil from his hands. "Because the first test was for my son," he said. "This one is for you." We walked slowly along the path, the autumn wind carrying the faint smell of rain and earth. "I know what you're thinking," he said, "that I'm a manipulative old man who enjoys playing God." I didn't answer. "You wouldn't be entirely wrong," he admitted, with a small chuckle. "But I've learned that wealth attracts masks, and I've spent most of my life trying to see the faces beneath them." He paused by a stone bench. "Sit." I did. "I've watched men destroy each other over money, Ava. I've seen families rot from the inside out because they forgot the difference between value and worth, my own sons included." His eyes, clear and sharp, turned toward me. "But you reminded me of something that even I had started to forget, that decency still exists, that character still matters. You didn't know who I was, you didn't care, and that made you rare." I listened, unsure where he was leading me. "My company," he said, finally, "needs someone who still remembers what people look like when they're not wearing armor. Someone uncorrupted by the machinery of greed. I want you to help me rebuild its soul." I blinked. "You want me to work for you?" He nodded once. "Not as an employee, as a conscience." I laughed, despite the absurdity of it. "Mr. Sterling, I run a nonprofit that can barely afford printer ink. I think your company might eat me alive."
"That's exactly why I need you," he said simply. "People like my son, they're brilliant, efficient, but they've forgotten empathy. I want someone who hasn't." He turned, hands clasped behind his back. "There's more. I'm leaving soon, stepping back. I need to know who I can trust with what remains, my fortune, my legacy, my son." The words hit me harder than I expected. "You're testing me again," I said quietly. He smiled faintly. "I prefer to call it inviting understanding." We spent hours in that garden, talking not about business, but about life. He asked about the children I worked with, the single mothers I helped find housing, the old man who lived behind our office and told stories to anyone who listened. He listened with the same intent focus as before, nodding occasionally, smiling when I laughed. When I mentioned that David had been struggling since that dinner, his face softened with something that almost looked like regret. "I didn't mean to break him," he said quietly, "only to show him the mirror he'd been avoiding." "He's trying," I said. "He really is." "Then help him," Arthur said. "Teach him what you taught me." When I left that day, he pressed something into my hand, a small silver key. "What's this?" I asked. "A reminder. When the time comes, you'll know what it unlocks." And before I could ask what he meant, he turned back to his lilies, humming softly under his breath. The butler escorted me out, and once again the gates closed behind me with their quiet, final click. That night, I told David everything about the garden, the job offer, the key. He listened, stone-faced, the color draining from his cheeks. "He offered you a job?" he asked, voice low. "Yes, but not a real one, more like a role." "A role in his world," he said sharply. "Do you see what he's doing? He's replacing me with you." "That's not true, David." "It's exactly true." He stood up, pacing, his voice rising. "You passed his test, so now you're the chosen one. Meanwhile, I'm the disappointment, the failure." "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about, Ava? Huh? You wanted him to love you, and now he does. Congratulations." The bitterness in his voice was worse than anger. It was pain disguised as cruelty. I took a breath, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. "Maybe he's not the only one testing people," I whispered. He stopped, frozen, staring at me, and for a long time, neither of us spoke again. 3 weeks later, Arthur Sterling died quietly in his sleep. The obituary called it a peaceful passing after a long illness. But when the lawyers summoned us to the estate for the reading of the will, that small silver key was waiting in my purse. And that was the day I finally learned what it was meant to unlock. The morning of the will reading felt heavy before the sun even rose. A pale gray light crept through our curtains, but neither of us moved. David sat at the edge of the bed, silent, suit jacket hanging loose on his shoulders. He hadn't spoken much since the news of his father's passing. It wasn't grief in the usual sense, no tears, no visible pain, just quiet disbelief. The kind that comes when the storm you've been bracing for all your life finally ends, and you don't know what to do with the stillness. The Sterling estate looked different that day. The grandeur was still there, the columns, the stone lions, the sweeping steps, but something in the air had shifted. It no longer felt intimidating, just empty. Inside, the lawyer, a man with a voice like a ticking clock, ushered us into the study. Arthur's portrait hung above the fireplace, that same calm, intelligent gaze watching over everything. It was strange.
I felt his presence more strongly in that silence than I had when he was alive. The lawyer opened a folder. Mr. Arthur Sterling's will is simple, he said. His assets and controlling shares are divided equally between his two sons. David blinked. 2 sons? The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Yes, Mr. David Sterling and Mr. Michael Sterling. David froze. Michael? The older brother? The one who had been disowned years ago? I felt the air leave his body in one sharp exhale. For all the tests, the striving, the desperate need to earn his father's favor, it hadn't mattered. He was still equal. The lawyer continued, oblivious to the storm in front of him. However, Mr. Sterling left an additional note and a key. My pulse quickened. He said Miss Ava Peters would know what it unlocks. Every head in the room turned toward me. David's eyes were wide, a mix of confusion and suspicion. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small silver key Arthur had given me in the garden. My hand trembled slightly as I held it up. I gave it to him, I said softly. The lawyer nodded. Then you should see what he meant. The butler led us down a narrow hallway I hadn't seen before, far from the glittering dining room, far from the echoes of wealth. At the end was a plain wooden door, old and unremarkable. I slipped the key into the lock, my heart pounding, and turned it. Inside was a small study, dust motes swirling in the afternoon light. The air smelled of cedar and paper. On the desk sat a single leather-bound notebook, and next to it a sealed letter addressed in Arthur's neat handwriting. For Ava. My hands shook as I opened it. The note inside was brief, written in the same elegant, decisive script I'd come to recognize. My dear Ava, if you're reading this, then I am gone, but perhaps not entirely. This room, this key, this notebook, they are yours, not as inheritance, but as trust. Inside are the plans for something I began but could never finish, a foundation, one that invests not in profit, but in people. I built empires, Ava, but I never built a soul into them. You can. You once gave a scarf to a stranger without expecting a thing in return. That moment reminded me of the person I might have been if I hadn't spent a lifetime chasing approval instead of purpose. Use this to help others find their warmth again. And, if David ever loses his way, remind him, wealth isn't a crown, it's a test. With affection, Arthur Sterling. I sat there for a long time, tears falling silently onto the paper. David stood in the doorway, watching me, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke, voice small. He trusted you more than me. I shook my head, closing the letter carefully. No, David. He trusted us. He wanted both of us to learn what really matters. But you're the one he gave the key to. I smiled faintly through my tears. Maybe because I knew what it was like to have nothing and still give. We spent the rest of the day going through the room together. Inside the notebook were hand-drawn outlines for community centers, scholarships, programs for workers' children, plans for a world far humbler than the one he'd built. And for the first time, I saw a softness in David's expression. Not guilt, not anger, just quiet realization. He really believed in this, he whispered. I said, he believed in people, and I think he wanted you to as well. Months later, we launched it, the Sterling Foundation for Human Dignity. The name was Arthur's, but the soul of it was ours. David ran the operations, focused, determined, but different now, softer. And I oversaw the programs, mentoring, outreach, community rebuilding. Every plaque in every office carried the same inscription engraved in Arthur's handwriting. True wealth is not what you keep, but what you give. On the day we inaugurated the first community center, I wore the cashmere scarf again. It still smelled faintly of rain and cedar. As I stood on the small stage, looking out at the children, the workers, the families gathered there, I felt something I hadn't felt that first night. Peace. Arthur's tests were never about punishment. They were about revelation. And I finally understood what he'd meant when he'd said kindness was the only true currency. Because in that moment, surrounded by laughter, warmth, and life, I was the richest woman in the world. End of story. The Cashmere Test.